People often ask me what I've learned after living for more than 9 decades. They expect some secret about investing, some hidden formula for building wealth, or maybe a prediction about what happens next in the economy. But lately, I've been thinking about something much simpler. A few months ago, I found myself looking through old photographs, pictures from my 50s, pictures from my 60s, and what surprised me wasn't how much the world had changed. It was how certain I looked. Back then, I genuinely believed I understood life. I thought I had a pretty good handle on business, money, success, and what mattered most. But when you've lived long enough, you discover something humbling. Every decade teaches you that the previous version of yourself still had a lot to learn. That's not failure. That's life. And if you're in your 50s or 60s right now, I want to tell you something important. These are not the years when life begins slowing down. These are not the years when your best opportunities disappear. In many ways, these may be the most valuable years you'll ever have. You possess something younger people desperately need but rarely have: experience, perspective, judgment, the ability to see consequences before they arrive. The challenge is learning how to use those advantages wisely, because after all these years, I've realized that success has far less to do with intelligence and far more to do with priorities. The people who build meaningful lives eventually learn what deserves their attention and what doesn't. When I think back to my 50s, the first thing I remember is how busy I was. Berkshire Hathaway was growing rapidly. New opportunities seemed to appear every week. There were annual reports to read, businesses to analyze, executives to meet, and decisions that felt incredibly important at the time. I loved the work. In many ways, I still do. Even today, I enjoy coming into the office because I've always been fascinated by businesses and human behavior. But looking back with the benefit of time, I can see something I couldn't see then. I was so focused on building a future that I occasionally forgot to experience the present. That's a mistake many successful people make. They convince themselves that everything they're sacrificing today will somehow be worth it tomorrow. The problem is that tomorrow eventually arrives, and some of the things you postponed are no longer available. The children who wanted your attention grow up. The parents you planned to visit grow older. The opportunities for certain conversations quietly disappear. Years ago, one of my children told me something that stayed with me. It wasn't criticism. It was simply honesty. They wished I had been around more often. Not for major events, not for grand gestures. Just for ordinary moments. The dinners, the conversations, the simple experiences that seem unimportant while they're happening but become priceless later. That's when I realized something. Success can never fully compensate for absence. Money can solve many problems, but it cannot recreate moments that have already passed. And that lesson becomes more valuable with every passing year. Now let's talk about money, because I know that's one of the reasons many people are watching this. By the time someone reaches their 50s or 60s, a quiet fear often begins to appear. It doesn't always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it shows up during a sleepless night. Sometimes it appears while looking at a retirement account balance. And sometimes it arrives when a friend retires and you suddenly realize how quickly time is moving. The fear sounds something like this: what if it's too late? Too late to build wealth, too late to invest, too late to create financial security. Let me tell you something I've learned after watching thousands of people over many decades. That belief is far more dangerous than reality itself, because once people convince themselves it's too late, they stop trying. And the moment they stop trying, they guarantee the outcome they fear. The truth is that compounding doesn't ask for your age. It doesn't care whether you're 25 or 55. It only cares whether you begin. Many people in their 50s are earning more than they ever have before. Their children are becoming independent. Large expenses are beginning to disappear. In many cases, they finally have resources available that they never had when they were younger. That creates opportunity. And opportunity is still incredibly valuable, even if the clock has been ticking for decades. One of the greatest misconceptions about wealth is that it belongs only to people who started early. Starting early certainly helps. I won't pretend otherwise. Time is one of the most powerful forces in finance, but people often underestimate what 20 years can accomplish. 20 years is not a short period of time. Entire companies are built in 20 years. Entire fortunes are created in 20 years. Entire lives change in 20 years. Yet many people act as though retirement begins tomorrow. It doesn't. If you're 55 and healthy, you may still have 20, 30, or even 40 years ahead of you. That's enough time for investments to grow. It's enough time for habits to change. It's enough time for discipline to transform your future. The problem is that people spend too much energy regretting the years behind them and not enough energy using the years ahead of them. Regret feels productive because it keeps your mind busy, but regret never deposits money into an investment account. It never reduces debt. It never improves your future. Action does. Every dollar invested today has a job to perform. Every dollar wasted today has an opportunity it will never receive. That's why financial success at this stage isn't about making up for lost time. It's about maximizing the time you still have. The first major mistake I see people make in their 50s and 60s is continuing to spend like they're 35. When you're younger, you can recover from financial mistakes. You have decades available to correct course. But as time becomes more valuable, every financial decision carries more weight. Yet many people continue upgrading lifestyles without asking a simple question. Does this actually improve my life? Or am I simply spending because I can? I've always found it fascinating how quickly people become accustomed to things they once considered luxuries. The larger house becomes normal. The expensive car becomes normal. The premium lifestyle becomes normal. Then those expenses become obligations, and obligations quietly steal freedom. One reason I've lived the way I have is because I learned early that happiness and spending are not the same thing. A more expensive object doesn't automatically create a better life. Sometimes it simply creates a larger bill. The goal is not deprivation. The goal is discernment, understanding what genuinely improves your life and what merely impresses other people. Because retirement security is built one decision at a time, every unnecessary expense today is future flexibility you're giving away, and flexibility becomes increasingly valuable as the years pass. The second mistake is even more dangerous because it often appears reasonable on the surface. People realize they are behind financially, so they begin searching for shortcuts. Suddenly they're interested in speculative investments. They want to double their money quickly. They become fascinated by promises of extraordinary returns. This is where panic enters the picture, and panic is one of the most expensive emotions in finance. Every market cycle creates a new version of the same story. Someone promises easy wealth. Someone claims traditional investing is outdated. Someone insists they've discovered a shortcut that changes everything. And every cycle, people lose fortunes chasing it. I've been investing for more than 70 years. I've watched trends come and go. I've watched bubbles inflate and collapse. The lesson never changes. Wealth is usually built slowly. It grows through consistency. It grows through patience. It grows through avoiding major mistakes. Most financially successful people didn't become wealthy because they hit a home run. They became wealthy because they kept hitting singles for decades. That's not exciting. It doesn't make headlines, but it works. And at this stage of life, protecting capital is often more important than chasing extraordinary returns. If I were sitting across the table from someone in their 50s today, the first thing I'd ask them to do is something surprisingly simple. I'd tell them to examine every dollar they spend, not because spending is bad, but because unconscious spending is dangerous. Most people know approximately what they earn. Very few know exactly where their money goes. They assume they understand their finances, but assumptions are expensive. The moment you write everything down, reality becomes visible. Subscriptions you forgot about, services you rarely use, expenses that no longer serve a purpose, habits that quietly consume resources month after month. Financial freedom doesn't begin with investing. It begins with awareness, because once you know where your money is going, you gain control, and control creates options. The goal isn't cutting everything. The goal is aligning spending with what actually matters. Money is simply a tool. A tool should serve your priorities. If it isn't serving your priorities, it's serving someone else's. That's why clarity is so valuable. Once you gain it, better decisions become much easier. Another lesson I've learned involves debt. Most people understand debt intellectually, but they underestimate its emotional cost. Debt doesn't just affect your bank account, it affects your peace of mind. Every payment represents future income already committed. Every obligation reduces flexibility. That's why high-interest debt is particularly destructive. It compounds against you. While investments are trying to build your future, debt is quietly consuming it. The older you become, the more important flexibility becomes. Life becomes less predictable, not more. Health changes. Family needs change. Opportunities appear unexpectedly. Financial obligations make it harder to respond. That's why eliminating expensive debt often provides a return that goes beyond mathematics. It creates freedom. And freedom has tremendous value. Many people spend years trying to maximize investment returns while ignoring debts that are quietly undermining everything else. That's backwards. Build on a solid foundation first, then allow investments to grow. Stability is underrated because it feels boring, but stability creates opportunity, and opportunity is where wealth eventually appears. One piece of advice I've repeated for decades is remarkably simple. Most people should own low-cost index funds. Every year someone asks whether there's a better strategy. Every year my answer remains largely unchanged. Why? Because simplicity works. The stock market rewards ownership. An index fund allows you to own hundreds of businesses simultaneously. You don't need to predict which company will dominate next year. You don't need to monitor every headline. You don't need to become a full-time investor. You simply participate in the growth of productive businesses. Over time, economies grow, companies innovate, profits increase, owners benefit. That's the entire idea. It isn't exciting, but investing shouldn't be exciting. Excitement often signals risk. Successful investing should feel almost boring. You invest consistently. You remain patient. You ignore noise. You allow time to do its work. Most investors struggle because they constantly interfere. They buy. They sell. They react emotionally. Meanwhile, patient investors quietly allow decades to pass, and decades are where extraordinary results usually come from. But eventually every discussion about money arrives at a deeper question. What are you actually buying with all this effort? Most people answer incorrectly. They think they're buying things. Houses, cars, vacations, comfort. Those things matter, but they're not the ultimate goal. What you're really buying is freedom. Freedom to choose how you spend your time. Freedom to walk away from situations that no longer serve you. Freedom to help people you care about. Freedom to make decisions without constant financial pressure. That's why money matters, not because it creates happiness directly, but because it creates options, and options become increasingly valuable as you grow older. I've known people with enormous wealth who weren't happy. I've known people with modest wealth who lived deeply fulfilling lives. The difference wasn't the size of their accounts. It was how they used their resources. The purpose of financial security is not accumulation. It's liberation. It's creating a life where money serves you instead of controlling you. And once you understand that, every financial decision begins to look different. Eventually, every conversation about money leads to something much deeper. Time. When you're young, time feels unlimited. You assume there will always be another opportunity, another year, another chance to do the things you've been postponing. You tell yourself you'll travel later, you'll spend more time with family later, you'll slow down later, you'll enjoy life later, but later has a way of arriving much faster than expected. I'm in my 90s now, and one thing becomes incredibly clear when you've lived this long. Time is the most valuable asset you'll ever possess. Not money, not investments, not businesses. Time, because money can be replaced, careers can be rebuilt, mistakes can be corrected, but time only moves in one direction. I've known people who spent their entire lives preparing for retirement. They worked long hours, they saved aggressively, they sacrificed experiences because they believed there would always be another opportunity. Then retirement finally arrived and their health didn't cooperate. Some became too tired to travel. Some became too sick to enjoy the freedom they'd spent decades building. And some never reached retirement at all. That's a difficult truth, but it's an important one. Preparing for the future matters. But so does living today. Balance isn't weakness. Balance is wisdom. The goal isn't choosing between enjoying life now or preparing for later. The goal is doing both. If I could go back and change one thing, it wouldn't be an investment decision. It wouldn't be a business acquisition. It wouldn't be a financial mistake. It would be how I spent my time. Looking back, there were countless evenings when I stayed focused on work when I could have been with family. There were weekends spent reading reports when I could have been creating memories. At the time, those decisions felt logical. The work seemed important. The opportunities seemed urgent. But here's what nobody tells you. Most urgent things eventually become unimportant. Most truly important things never feel urgent while they're happening. A conversation with someone you love doesn't seem life-changing in the moment. A family dinner doesn't appear significant. A weekend trip feels ordinary. Yet years later, those are often the memories that remain. The business deals blur together. The meetings disappear. The reports are forgotten. But the people remain, or at least the memories of them do. That's why relationships deserve more attention than most people give them. Success becomes surprisingly empty when there's nobody meaningful to share it with. Money can improve comfort. It cannot replace connection. And connection is what ultimately gives life its meaning. There's another subject people in their 50s and 60s often avoid discussing: health. The reason is simple. Most of us assume we'll have more of it than we actually do. Health feels permanent right up until the moment it doesn't. I've been fortunate in many ways. Genetics certainly helped. But even with good fortune, I've learned that the body eventually demands attention. The reality is simple. Your health influences every part of your future. It affects your freedom, your independence, your energy, and your ability to enjoy everything you've worked for. That's why taking care of yourself is not selfish. It's one of the smartest investments you'll ever make. The challenge is that health works a lot like investing. Small decisions compound over time. Daily walks matter. Regular checkups matter. Better habits matter. You don't notice dramatic results immediately, but years later, the difference becomes enormous. I've met people with millions of dollars who would gladly trade a large portion of their wealth for better health. That's because they finally realized something. Wealth without health is a very limited form of wealth. The purpose of financial freedom is to create a better life. Your health determines how much of that life you're actually able to enjoy. As people grow older, another question eventually begins appearing: legacy. Most people assume legacy is about money. It isn't. Money is part of it, but it's not the most important part. When people remember you, they rarely remember your account balance. They remember how you treated them. They remember your character. They remember whether you kept your word. They remember whether you were generous, kind, and trustworthy. That's what survives. I've spent years thinking about this. The older you become, the more you realize that reputation is one of the most valuable assets you'll ever own. It takes decades to build and moments to destroy. That's why integrity matters. That's why relationships matter. That's why how you live matters. If you're in your 50s or 60s, you're in a unique position. You still have time to shape your legacy. You still have time to repair damaged relationships. You still have time to become more generous. You still have time to focus on what truly matters. Legacy isn't something created at the end of life. It's created every day through ordinary actions. The question isn't what people will say about you after you're gone. The question is whether you're living in a way that makes those future words worth hearing. So let me leave you with one final thought. If you're in your 50s or 60s, you're not running out of opportunities. You're entering one of the most important chapters of your life. You have experience that younger people don't possess. You have perspective that only time can provide. You've survived mistakes, disappointments, successes, and challenges. All of those experiences have value if you're willing to learn from them. Get your finances in order, save consistently, invest intelligently, reduce unnecessary debt, build security, but don't stop there. Protect your health, strengthen your relationships, spend time with the people who matter, be grateful for what you already have while still working towards something better. Because in the end, wealth is not measured only by the size of a portfolio. It's measured by the quality of your life. It's measured by your freedom, your peace of mind, your relationships, and your ability to spend your time the way you choose. After more than 90 years, that's the conclusion I've reached. Money matters, but money is a tool, not the destination. The destination is a life well lived, and the beautiful thing is that if you're watching this today, you still have time to build exactly that kind of life.